Here we're going to talk about the cognitive bias known as hindsight bias and how it can affect our perception of past events. Hindsight bias is a psychological phenomenon where people tend to overestimate their ability to predict past events after they have occurred. It's a kind of "I knew it all along" phenomenon, where people believe that they could have predicted the outcome of an event, even though they didn't have any prior knowledge of it. For example, imagine that a company releases a new product that fails to meet its sales targets. After the fact, people might say things like, "I knew that product was going to fail," or "it was obvious that it wasn't going to be successful." But in reality, it's unlikely that many people actually predicted the failure before it happened. This is a classic example of hindsight bias in action. The illusion of predictability created by hindsight bias can have negative consequences. For instance, if we believe that we could have predicted the outcome of a past event, we might be more confident in our abilities to predict future events. We might also be more likely to make decisions based on faulty assumptions. So, how can we overcome hindsight bias? Here are a few strategies. Be aware of the bias. The first step in overcoming hindsight bias is to be aware of it. Recognize that you have a tendency to believe that past events were more predictable than they actually were. Be conscious of your thoughts and feelings when evaluating past events and decisions. Consider multiple possible outcomes. When making predictions or evaluating past events, consider multiple possible outcomes, not just the one that actually occurred. This will help you avoid the trap of thinking that the outcome was inevitable. Evaluate your thought process. When evaluating past events or decisions, consider how you arrived at your predictions or conclusions. Did you have all the information you needed at the time? Were there any biases or assumptions that influenced your thinking? By evaluating your thought process, you can gain a better understanding of how hindsight bias may have influenced your perceptions. Practice humility. Recognize that no one can predict the future with 100% accuracy. Be humble about your abilities, and accept that there will always be some level of uncertainty and unpredictability in life. It's important to note that hindsight bias is not always a bad thing. In some cases, it can help us learn from past experiences and make better decisions in the future. However, when it leads us to overestimate our abilities and make faulty assumptions, it can be harmful. Let's dive deeper into the mechanisms behind hindsight bias and how it affects our decision-making. One reason why hindsight bias is so pervasive is that our brains are wired to create coherent narratives out of the events in our lives. We want to make sense of the world around us, and one way we do that is by creating cause and effect relationships between events. In hindsight, it's easy to see how past events led to the outcome we experienced, but this doesn't mean that those events were actually predictable at the time. Another factor that contributes to hindsight bias is the availability heuristic. This is the tendency to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. When we look back on past events, we have more information available to us than we did at the time. We know how things turned out, and we have a clearer picture of the factors that led to that outcome. This makes it easier for us to believe that we could have predicted the outcome if we had only thought about it a little harder. In conclusion, hindsight bias is a powerful cognitive bias that can distort our perceptions of the past. By being aware of the bias, considering multiple possible outcomes, evaluating our thought process, and practicing humility, we can overcome it and make more informed decisions. We hope this was informative for you. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel, Explified.